youngest reporter from Group 6, and our topic is about culture. As we go on, we will be discussing what culture is, what its characteristics are, and how culture influences consumer behavior. As for my part of the report, I will be discussing culture and its characteristics and the influence of culture on consumption. This culture affects the run of the business. As we all know, culture plays a significant role in influencing consumer perception, which later on turns into influencing preferences and later on turns into influencing consumer to purchase a product or a service. So no matter how great you have planned for such marketing advertisements or how you will be marketing your product, no matter how great your marketing mix is, your marketing plan is, if the culture of a certain country could not accept the way you will be introducing your product to them, it will be nonsense, right? Because one should expect that a product may have to be modified, that a new distribution may have to be found, or that a new promotional strategy may have to be considered in running a business in certain countries, which is why we have to be open about the differences of the culture in different countries. So next slide states that when marketing product overseas, businesses should be sensitive to local conditions. Businesses must be sensitive to the culture of that particular place or the culture of the people in that particular place. For example, in Islamic countries, suggestive advertisements may be deemed offensive. And then also, advertisements featuring alcohol and pork, those in particular countries, they do not accept advertisements featuring alcohol and pork for the reason that they do not drink alcohol and they do not eat pork. And then also, Arabic and Hebrew script should be used with care and avoid situations that will disrespect their Hebrew or Arabic script. So let us now proceed to culture and its characteristics. So the first characteristic is that culture is prescriptive. It is said that out of necessity, culture must be based on social interaction and creation. Of course, culture will not exist on its own without social interaction and without people creating and prescribing culture to one another. Smoking, for instance, was once socially acceptable behavior, but recently it has become more and more undesirable both socially and medically. So next is culture is socially shared. It prescribes kinds of behavior considered acceptable in a society. As a result, culture provides guidance for decision making. So years ago in China, parents shared a belief that if their girl child has a small feet, she will be successful in the future. And so they decided to bind the feet of their child so that it will not grow longer or it will not grow bigger, and that her future will be bright as the sun. So those are just some of the examples wherein culture is socially shared from parents to parents and from parents to their children. Next is culture facilitates communication. Of course, culture facilitates communication. Culture usually imposes common habits of thoughts and feeling among people. Thus, within a given group, culture makes it easier for people to communicate with one another. So, without communication, culture will not exist up to this day. And so, culture facilitates communication because people with the same culture tend to communicate better with one another. Next is that culture is learned. Culture is not inherited genetically. It must be learned and acquired. And so, same as what is said earlier, culture is socially shared. Here, culture is learned. This does not exist out of nowhere. It does not exist out of nowhere. It is not inherited genetically. Culture is learned for example, from my parents, passed down to me, and then I will pass our culture to the next generation. And so I will be the one teaching my children about our culture, and that is why it is stated that culture is learned and not inherited genetically. So here we have the enculturization and acculturization. which means enculturization refers to when a person observes or learns the culture from which he or she is raised. For example, me absorbing or learning the culture of my parents. Meanwhile, acculturization occurs when a person learns and absorbs a culture other than the culture wherein he or she is raised. For example, me absorbing or learning the culture of the Americans, the culture of the Koreans. That's acculturization. Next slide states that culture is subjective. So culture is subjective. People in different cultures often have different ideas about the same object, of course. Which is acceptable in one culture may not necessarily be so in another. In this regard, culture is both unique and arbitrary. So culture is subjective. Of course, as what I said earlier, different countries or different people from different countries have different have different perceptions, and so culture is subjective. For example, is that in the Philippines it is accepted for 18 years old and above, or even so if you're already married and you live with your parents, it's fine because Filipino people are considered to be family oriented. Meanwhile, in America it is different, wherein once you reach 18, you could get kicked out of the house and you must afford to live on your own and have your own apartment. So that's when culture from different places are different, which is why culture is subjective. So next is culture is enduring. Because culture is shared and passed down from generation to generation, it is relatively stable and somewhat permanent. Old habits are hard to break, and people tends to maintain its own heritage in spite of the continuously changing world. The given example of this is the one-child policy in China. So because couples are only allowed to have one child, and most of the couples prefer to have a boy as a child, what they do is they execute their child if it is born to be a girl. And so that is why culture is enduring. Firstborn child that turns out to be girls endured to be killed so that couples can reproduce a child which is a boy, which they prefer to be a boy. So the last two characteristics are culture is cumulative and culture is dynamic. For culture is cumulative, each generation adds something of its own culture before passing the heritage onto the next generation. So of course, culture tends to become broader based over time because new ideas are incorporated and become a part of the culture. For example, me, I add a little something to my culture before passing it down to the next generation, and so the next generation could add up new ideas before passing it to the next generation, and that is why culture is cumulative. Meanwhile, the other stated that culture is dynamic. Culture is constantly changing, of course. It adapts itself to new situations and new resources of knowledge. The dynamic aspect of culture can make some products obsolete and can usher in the new buying habits. And so, same as culture is cumulative, as we add a little something to our culture changes, and that is how culture becomes dynamic. And so, those are the characteristics of culture. First, again, let's do a recap, which is culture is prescriptive, culture is socially shared, culture facilitates communication, culture is learned, culture is subjective, culture is enduring, and culture is cumulative, and culture is dynamic. Now, let us move on to the influence of... So, let us now proceed and briefly discuss the influence of culture on consumption. Consumption patterns, lifestyles, and the priority of needs are all dictated by culture. Let us put it this way. For example, you are a Muslim and you are not allowed to eat pork. Your culture does not allow you to consume pork or drink alcohol. Would you buy pork? Would you buy alcohol? Of course not, right? Another example is in the West. Westerners are known to consume a lot of pasta or a lot of bread. It is because it is in their culture wherein they are used to eat a lot of pasta and bread rather than having, like us Asians, rather than having a lot of rice. Another example is that it is in the culture of Chinese people wherein they consume a lot of raw meat, right? They are known to consume a lot of raw meat. And so that is how culture affects or influence the consumption of different people on different places. Different people that have different cultures also consumes different food or different products. So that's simply how we can explain the influence of culture on consumption. Thank you very much for listening. This is Jocelyn Pangilinan Rama. Let us now proceed to the next reporter. Thank you.
I'm Patricia G. Panganiban and I'm going to report influence of culture on thinking processes. Thinking processes are also affected by culture. When traveling overseas, it is virtually impossible for a person to observe foreign cultures without making references, perhaps unconsciously back to the personal cultural values. Self-reference criterion, or SRC, defined as unconscious reference to one's own cultural values, experiences, and knowledge as the basis for decision. Because of the effect of the SRC, the individuals tend to be bound by his or her own cultural assumption. It is thus important for the traveler to recognize how perception of overseas events can be distorted by the effect of the SRC. For example, people may make the wrong business decision in foreign country by thinking how they would handle the same situation if they were in their home country. Another example is when fast food chains launch in India, they have a self-reference criterion to other global market that people eat meat and animal oil. However, half of the population was vegetarian. Hence, to adjust to the Indian market, the company not only separated the menu but also bifurcated the kitchen. Hence, self-reference criterions had to be changed and the adjustments had to be made as per the foreign country demand. Let's move on. In order to investigate a phenomenon in another country, a researcher or marketing manager must attempt to eliminate the SRC effect. An awareness of the influence of the SRC is valuable because such awareness can help a manager to prevent a transfer of personal cultural norms on a wholesale basis to an overseas market. This awareness should make a manager more customer-oriented, and the marketing strategy developed will more likely reflect true market needs. This awareness should make a manager more customer-oriented, and the marketing strategy developed will more likely reflect true market needs. Influence of culture on communication processes. A country may be classified as either a high-context culture or a low-context culture. The context of a culture is either high or low in terms of in-depth background information. This classification provides an understanding of various cultural orientation and explains how communication is conveyed and perceived. Low-context culture messages are explicit and clear in the sense that actual words used to convey the main part of information in communication. The words and their meanings, being independent entities, can be separated from the context. High context culture, the communication may be indirect and the expressive manner in which the message is delivered becomes crucial. The context of communication is high because it includes a great deal of additional information, such as message sender's value, positions, background, and association in the society. In low context culture, what is important then is what is said, not how it is said, and not the environment within which it is said. While in high context culture, the messages cannot be understood without its content. According to Hall, cultures also vary in the manner by which information's processing occurs. Monochromic schedules, punctuality, and a sense that time forms a purposeful straight line are indicators of such cultures. Monochromic cultures like to do just one thing at a time. North Americans and North European countries are monochronic society where business managers typically divide work schedules into sequential chunks, while polychromic, the sense that people work on several fronts simultaneously instead of pursuing a single task. Polychronic cultures like to do multiple things at the same time. Arab, African, South American, and Asian countries are typically more accepting of changes in schedules. Monochromic and polychromic difference is monochromic cultures like to do things just one thing at a time, while polychromic like to do multiple things at the same time. That's all. Thank you.
And I will tackle about cultural universal. Cultural universal is an element, pattern, trait, or institution that is common to all human cultures worldwide. Failure to consider cultural universal results to a tendency to overemphasize cultural differences. Although cultural universals are common to all human cultures worldwide, it does not necessarily mean a certain cultural universal is applicable everywhere. Cultural traits must be still considered. With universality of basic desires, some products can be marketed overseas with little modification. The need to have fun, for instance, make it natural for people everywhere to accept video games. Likewise, culture is not barrier to computer software dealing with engineering and scientific application that manipulate semantic drawings and numbers rather than words. Note that shared values do not necessarily mean shared, identical behavior. The manner of expressing culturally universal traits still varies across countries. Another example, music is a cultural universal, but that does not mean that the same kind of music is acceptable everywhere, because musical tastes are not internationally uniform. The type of music used must be varied to appeal to a particular country. Cultural similarities and illusion. Cultural universals should not be interpreted as meaning that the two cultures are very similar too often. Cultural similarities at first glance may be just an illusion. A marketer must thus guard against taking any market for granted. The perceived cultural difference, real or imagined, explain not only why some American products have been unsuccessful in Canada, but also why Canadian products have been failed in the US market. Repeated campaigns to sell the electric tea kettle, an indispensable part of Canadian home life, in the US market have been unsuccessful. Vegemite is the closest thing to Australia's national food, with 90% of Australian homes having it. Yet, this blackiest spread has never been able to find its way into the American customer's diet.
So good day everyone, I am your fourth reporter Susmita Franz Panal and I will be discussing the topic about communication through verbal languages. So before we start our topic, let us define what is language. So language is the principal method of human communication, consisting of words used in a structured and conventional way and conveyed by speech, writing, or gesture. So based on the definition, there are three ways to use the language as a communication. First is through speech or verbal communication, which will be our topic for today. Second is the writing or the written communication, which are the formal letters like business proposal, feasibility, thesis, minutes of the meeting, and lastly, the gesture or the non-verbal communication, which will be discussed later by the next reporter. So, next bullet.
Language is a significant part of a culture. So why is it called as the significant part of a culture? It is because language is used as the communication tool. So without the language, it is impossible to have a communication. So when we say culture, these are the shared belief of two person or group of people. So how can we express ourselves to others without the language? So how can we share our thoughts and belief without the language? So do you think there is a culture if there is no language? So next is the table 6.1. As you can see on the PPT, there are 6.1 on the left side of your PPT, and it shows the top 20 languages all over the world. And the top most famous language is the Chinese or the Mandarin. So in my opinion, Chinese is the most famous language. It is because Chinese are business minded. They are putting up businesses all over the world. They are risking internationally. That's why they are successful when it comes to business. And some countries want to collaborate or want to be part of a Chinese company. So next slide is about language acquisition, or simply how people acquire language. So based on the hypothesis, use it or lose it, people born with inherent ability to learn language. It means even when we are still a baby, we already have the language, and all we have to do is to study or enhance that ability. So next bullet, language acquisition may have biological component. So based on the geneticists, a team of geneticists and linguists, they discover a gene that underlies speech and language. These discoveries support the view that language is acquired and generated by brain, specifically neural circuitry. So some scientists argue that the gene may not be so specific to language. So therefore, the discovery still has not settled, and there is a long-lasting debate whether the brain handles language through dedicated or general mechanism. So next bullet. Several study has confirmed that US population in general have very low fluency. So based on the study given in our module, American managers believe that they don't need to learn another language because they believe that English is the universal language of the business communication. It is partially true, but for me to have a strong relationship with your business partner, you will need to understand them also on their own language. By that, they can feel that they are important, and you are really giving an effort to understand them with their own language. So next slide is about the translation or the differences of spelling, pronunciation, and writing of English language in different countries. So English is one kind of language, but it can be vary or it can be different if you travel in every countries. Just like the American and British English, there are both English, but there's a difference between the two. So For example, when we are talking about a sugary food, when we are talking about sugary food, in American it is called as dessert, while British use the word sweet. Next, another example. Elevator is used by the American, but British called it as a lift. Another example is French fries, used by American, and chips used by British. So truck for American and lorry for British. So another example is the word billion. When we say billion, American describe it as 1,000 million. They count billion as 1,000 of millions, while Britons describe it as a million of million. It means there's a million of million in 1 billion. So, okay ba yun? So, next example is a phrase like above. So for Americans, it means failure, while for Britons, it means success. So it's very different. It's contradict the definition of Americans. Next, there is also a difference with the spelling, but still the same in meaning. So for example, Americans spell the color as C-O-L-O-R, while in United Kingdom or the British people spell it as C-O-L-O-U-R. There's an adding letter, there's an additional letter, which is the U. And because of that, there will be also a difference with how will you pronounce it. So next is the pronunciation of letter C. So in USA, it is pronounced as Z, while in UK, it is pronounced as Z. It is because letter Z originated from the Greek word letter zeta. This gave rise to the Old French word "sadi," which resulted in English word said around 15th century. So next is there's also a difference when it comes to writing the date. So Americans follow the format month, day, year for writing the date, but for other countries it seems illogical, and they find more sense if the date follows the format day, month, year. So the confusion increases when the date writes in numerals, just like in the example above. So as you can see, the example 2/3/2007. So American read this as February 3, 2007, while other foreign countries read this as 2nd of March 2007, which is very far on how American read this. So if you are in America and you see a date like 10/15/2015, it is read as October 15, 2015. But when you are in other countries like on British countries, tama ba? Iba na yung so next slide is about the safe rule of thumb in international communication. So first is when in doubt, over-punctuate, or it means try to read or try to search for the word or information if it is good or bad. Kasi it is because some countries may misunderstood you. So next is keep ideas separate, making only one point at a time. So make a pause when you're trying to give a new information so that ideas won't mix up. Third is confirm discussion in writing. That's why business letters are important in business world. It can be the evidence of the discussion between groups or two people. Next is write down all figure using the style of the person you are talking to. Next, adjust your English to the level of your counterpart. Next is use visual aid whenever possible. Avoid technical sports and business jargons because some country might have a different definition with that, and it makes them confused. And the last topic that I will be discussing is about the marketing and language. So marketers should attempt to understand how consumer process linguistic information. So it is important to learn language. It is important for the marketers to learn the language of their customer, to understand them and to communicate with them, and when they know how they have the information about the customer, they will able to have a correct positioning of the product with the customer. They will position the product on the mind of the people successfully. So an example of this is making an advertisement about the certain product. So just like on the video that I watch on TikTok, there's a Colgate radio ad in English and they translated in Cebuano. So these are some of the example of how you will communicate with other dialect. So that's it for my report. Thank you.
People do not always communicate solely on spoken or written language. They use nonverbal communication. Nonverbal manners includes body language such as movements, appearance, dress, posture, gestures, and so on. Some body languages such as smiling are universal, but there are other body languages that vary in meaning across cultural lines. Examples of these are the Japanese and American culture. Japanese culture, so prolonged eye contact are viewed as being rude, and in the American culture, avoidance in eye contact is being impolite. So Americans are known for being talkative, while in the Japanese culture, they practice being polite and they are reserved, so they do not talk too much. In the American culture, they value time consciousness, while in the Japanese culture, they are too slow in making decisions. So knowing these nonverbal communication or nonverbal languages plays an important role in business, for it helps in creating a good impression and how you can be perceived in negotiations and discussions, especially if you know the proper or the right and the fit nonverbal communication that can be used in different countries if you are setting up a business in that place. Language of time. So time has different meanings for different cultures. Example is the question, why don't come over sometime? In the American culture, it is implying that you should give an advance notice when you come and visit. While in the Asian culture, its meaning is exactly what it is. You can drop in anytime without any appointments, regardless of how late or how early it may be in that day. So perceptions of time are culture bound, and there are 3 different perceptions of time that may be identified as linear separable time, So it is most common in the European or North American cultures. Its meaning is that time is linear in the sense that it has a past, present, and future. Time is valuable. So whatever you do in the past may contribute or may have an impact in the future outcome or output. And time is a future progression. So next perception of time is the circular traditional time, wherein life is supposed to follow a cycle and the future cannot be altered. So as a result, the future is seen as a past repeated. And there is no need to plan because time is not valuable in this concept. So its interpretation is that it sees time is and history as never moving but always returning to the certain point, or in short, repetitive. So next perception of time is the procedural or traditional time, wherein the activity or procedure is more relevant than the amount of time spent on it. So time and task is separate in this concept. So no matter when you did a task, regardless of how late or early it may be, the output will always be the same and will always stay the same as long as there is a certain procedure that you follow. Language of space. So space has a special meaning in different culture or different country. Example of this is the Latin Americans, wherein they always have these few inches of distance between them and the other person that they are talking to. When they are having conversations, they always tend to embrace the other person. While in the Asian culture, they are not used to physical touching and they always have this comfortable conversation distance between them. In the American culture, they are always in the middle. What I mean is that in the Asian perspective, they can be seen as too crowded or too close, while in the Latin American perspective, they can be seen as too far or too distant. So space is relative. What can be perceived as crowded in the US may be perceived as spacious somewhere else. A small room with low ceiling in the US standards is not small to Japanese and can be perceived as a huge and large room. Language of agreement. Agreement is the harmony of opinion and action or an arrangement as to a course of action. So in the business world, it is usual for other countries to hire managers in dealing with small business affairs. But in the US, they can be very legalistic about this matter. Even if it is just an errand about clarifications, they always tend to hire lawyers instead of managers in dealing with these issues. So agreements always depend on what country you are in. Language of friendship. Countries always have a different view about this matter. So for the people of Turkey, they've developed friendships first before determining whether a business relationship is feasible. While in the Chinese culture, they dine in first before talking business, unlike US approach of talking business first before having a meal together. While in the other countries, friendships are not taken lightly. Northern Europeans, French, and Germans value formality and respect as strongly established traditions. So it is very important for a business person to remember these points so that they can have a good and harmonious relationships with international businessmen.
Good day everyone, my name is Sharmel and I will be discussing about the continuation of our topic entitled Communication Through Nonverbal Language. So, let's talk about language of negotiation. Negotiation of meaning is a process that speakers go through to reach a clear understanding of each other, asking for clarification, rephrasing, and confirming what you think you have understood are all strategies for the negotiation of meaning. So, in nonverbal language of negotiation, let's use United States and Japan as our example in this topic. In United States of America, a lack of eye contact is usually viewed as an indication that something is not quite right. But a cultural style of communication negotiation in Japan requires a great deal less eye contact between speakers. Furthermore, in Japan, periods of silence are common during interaction, and the response of silence should not come as a surprise. So now, let's talk about language of religion. In search of spiritual guidance, people turn to religion. The major religions are familiar to everyone. Religion affects people in many ways because it prescribes people behavior, including work habits. Just like, for example, the Protestant work ethic encourages Christians to glorify God by working hard and being thrifty. Thus, many Europeans and Americans believe that work is a moral virtue and disapprove of the idle. Likewise, Islam exalts work, and idleness is seen as a sign of person's lack of faith in the religion. As such, anyone who is able to work is not allowed to become voluntary idle. Some religions, however, seem to guide people in the opposite direction. In Hinduism and Buddhism, the emphasis is on the elimination of desires because desires cause worrying. Not striving brings peace rather, and a person at peace does not suffer. Our next topic is quite interesting. So now let's talk about language of superstition. In modern world, it is easy for us to dismiss superstition as nonsense because yes, it's 2020. Everything had already explained because of science. Yet, superstition beliefs plays a crucial role in explaining personal as well as business behavior in all parts of the world. In Asia, fortune telling, palm reading, dream analysis and interpretation, phases of the moon, birthday, and handwriting analysis, communication with ghosts, and many other beliefs are part of everyday life. Physical appearance is often used to judge a person's characteristic. If you have already or if you have a long ear, you supposedly belong to those who have good fortune. In United States of America, just like here in the Philippines, Americans also knock on woods. They also cross their fingers and feel uneasy when a black cat crosses their path. Americans also do not want to walk under ladders and may be extra careful on Friday the 13th. So let's proceed to our next topic, which is language of colors. Flowers and colors have their own language and meaning. Preferences for particular colors are determined by culture because of custom and taboo. Some colors are viewed negatively. A color deemed positive and acceptable in one culture may be inappropriate in another. According to FTD and Inflora Incorporation, which sent flowers by wire to some 140 countries, the color red is used to cast spells in Mexico, and white bouquet is necessary to lift the spell. In Spain, red roses are associated more with lust than with love. In France, a dozen as well as 13 yellow roses are inappropriate because yellow suggests infidelity, and cut flowers by dozen or any other even number are unlucky. Both the color yellow and the number 13 are also inappropriate in Latin America, where yellow is associated with death rather than with infidelity. In Italy, roses serve as token of affection when they are sent in odd numbers to women. In Japan, on the other hand, men are on the receiving end of Valentine's Day. Since 16-petal chrysanthemum is used in the imperial family crest, any other use is disrespectful. Swiss women do not want flowers with strong scent. To Swedish women, cactus signals the end of romance. Other than flowers, colors by themselves have special meaning. Yellow is associated with disease in Africa. White is an appropriate color for a wedding gown in the USA, yet white is used alternately with black for mourning in India, Hong Kong, and Japan. Americans see red when they are angry, but red is a lucky color for Chinese. It is customary for the Chinese to put money in red envelopes as gifts for employees and children on special occasions, especially on the Chinese New Year's Day. Last but not the least, let's talk about language of gifts. Cultural attributes concerning the presentation of gifts vary greatly across the globe. Because of varying perception of gifts and their appropriateness, good intention can turn into surprises and even embarrassment when particular gifts violate cultural beliefs. For example, apparel is not commonly given in United States of America where it is considered too personal gift, nor in Russia where it is considered as bribe. In France, Russia, Germany, Taiwan, and Thailand, giving a knife as a present is inappropriate because it may cut or wound a friendship. Another example is handkerchief. A handkerchief should never be given in Thailand, Italy, Venezuela, and Brazil because such a gift is wishing a tragedy upon the recipient, implying that something distressing will happen in the near future, which will necessitate the use a handkerchief to wipe away the tears. Another example. Prudence requires one not to give potted plants to the sick in Japan because the illness may become more severe by taking deeper root. It is also wise to avoid giving four of any item with four in the name to the Chinese and Japanese because the word sounds like "si" in this language and means death. Likewise, clock are a poor choice of a gift in China and Taiwan because the word for a clock sounds like the word for terminate or for a pre-funeral visit to the dying.
Good afternoon, my name is Joshua Reyes and my report is about subculture. Culture is a distinct and identifiable cultural group that has values in common with the overall society, but also has a certain characteristics that are unique to itself. Basically, subculture is a group of people within a society or a country. Subculture preserve their own customs and lifestyle, making them significantly different from other groups within the larger culture or country which they are in. There are so many ways to classify a subculture, such as race, ethnic origin, demographics such as age, gender, or socio-economic information, and lastly, the social variables. Because of different cultures, worldwide consumer homogeneity or common type consumer does not exist. Next thing that I'm gonna show you is the different subculture happening in each country in the world. First, in Indonesia. For instance, Indonesia has far more than 300 ethnic groups with lifestyle and cultures that seems thousands of years apart. Next is Japan. In the case of Japan, the society is remarkably homogeneous, although some regional diversities as well as different income classes are to be found. The differentials are not pronounced. There are several reasons why Japan is a relatively homogeneous country. It is a small country in terms of area, making its populations geographically concentrated. National pride management philosophy also helps towards a high degree of unity. As a result, people work together harmoniously to achieve common goals. They need to work hard together, was frustrated initially by the repair of the economy after the World War. Canada. In contrast, it is a large country in terms of geography. Its population, though, much smaller than of Japan. It is much geographically dispersed and regional differences exist among the provinces, each having own unique characteristics. Furthermore, ethnic differences are clearly visible to anyone who travels across Canada. Canada's social environment makes it possible for ethnic groups to be active members in Canadian society, while having the freedom to purpose their own native customs. The environment thus accommodates what is known as ethnic pluralism. Canadians not only tolerate but encourage diversity in ethnic customs. Thus is the United States of America. In the USA, the population increase among Blacks, Hispanics, and Asian has been explosive. The number of Latinos in the USA is growing at more than twice the rate of Blacks. The Latino population in the country is the largest minority group. Hispanic households having 5 or more people. In addition, they have their own distinctive consumption of habits. They are most likely to use credits, and soccer is the integral part of their lives. Ethnic self-awareness is a temporary state during which person is more sensitive to information related to one's ethnicity. When aroused, this awareness can moderate consumers' responses to an advertising message. Therefore, I conclude subculture may provide an effective basis for market segmentation that marketers may use for international marketing. And that is my report about subculture. Now let's move on to our report's conclusion. It's acceptable beliefs, tradition, customs, and beliefs that are then socially shared. Culture is subjective, enduring, yet dynamic, and cumulative. Each culture has its own particular values and social practices, and the international marketing will be much further ahead if he or she tries to walk in other person's shoes in order to understand more clearly that person's concern and ideas. Because marketing takes place within a given culture. A fair marketing plan assumes meaning or is appropriate when only it's relevant to that given culture. In foreign cultural environment, the marketing plan that has worked well at home may not be longer effective. As a result, the firm marketing mix may have to undergo significant adaptation and adjustments. Effective marketing in this environment will thus mandate that company to be culturally responsive. And that is our report for today. Thank you for watching.